Welcome to The Deep Dive, the show where we take some of the most dense anatomical concepts and, well, we turn them into a guided tour that you can actually visualize and map out in your head.
And that's the goal today.
Today, we are strapping in for a really deep dive into the brainstem. This is the ultimate control center for life itself, a core structure so compact that precision, absolute precision, is paramount.
That precision is everything. You know, when you think of the brainstem, it's this tight, incredibly efficient command center. It's only about, 6 to 7.5 centimeters long, just tucked securely into the posterior cranial fossa.
That's tiny.
It is. So our mission is to navigate its three main parts, and we'll move deliberately from the bottom up. So the medulla oblongata, then the pons, and we'll finish at the midbrain.
I love that, mapping it piece by piece. So if we take any of those segments and slice it, in cross-section, how do we handle the layers? It's not just one uniform block of stuff, right?
Right. Oh, definitely not, no. Throughout most of the brainstem, you consistently find two major longitudinal layers. The ventral portion, so the part facing forward, that's the basis.
The basis.
And that primarily carries the descending motor highways. Then the dorsal portion is the tegmentum, and that's where you'll find the ascending sensory pathways, all the cranial nerve nuclei, and those really vital regulatory centers.
Okay, so basis is motor traffic going down, tegmentum's the functional core, handling all the sensory and regulatory stuff.
Precisely. And just to complete that picture, the most rostral segment, the midbrain, it's the only one that adds a third, very specialized layer right on top of the tegmentum, and that's called the tectum.
The stakes here feel just astronomical. We are talking about the hardware that manages survival. It's all happening independent of our conscious thought.
Absolutely. This region houses what we call the vital centers. You'll find the nuclei for cardiac and respiratory regulation down in the medulla, and woven through its entire length is the reticular formation.
Okay, let's pause on the reticular formation, the RF. It can sometimes feel like this juncture of the brainstem, but it is so critical. What's its main job, beyond just consciousness?
That is a fantastic question, because while it is essential for arousal, for maintaining consciousness, I think it's better to see the RF as the great modulator.
The modulator.
It gets input from virtually everywhere, and it influences everything. It's involved in pain transmission, in modulating muscle tone, autonomic control. It really is the body's internal alarm clock and the volume control for all sensory input.
Wow.
And because the brainstem is so densely packed with all of this, a lesion the size of your thumbnail can cause catastrophic multi-system failure.
That compactness has to be why the clinical correlations are so dramatic. We mentioned the worst-case scenario. Irreversible cardiac and respiratory arrest from medullary destruction.
Right.
But the other side of that is the locked-in syndrome, which is just unsettling.
It's horrifying. It is, because it's a failure of the motor outflow, not of consciousness. It's caused by bilateral damage, usually from a vascular occlusion to the ventral part of the pons.
So the person is aware.
Completely. The patient is totally paralyzed, can't move, can't speak, but their consciousness, which is housed in the intact tegmentum and the cortex, it remains fully preserved. So, anatomical localization isn't just theory here. It's a difference between life and irreversible loss of function.
Okay, let's start our guided tour at the bottom then. Section 1. The medulla oblongata. This is the transition zone from the spinal cord, maybe about 3 centimeters long. We need to build that mental image of the external surfaces first.
Okay, on the ventral surface, let's start at the midline. You have the ventral median fissure. Now, if you trace that fissure down caudally, you'll see it gets interrupted by the motor decussation.
And that's where the big motor fibers cross over.
That's it. This is where those massive descending motor fibers cross.
So what's right next to that midline?
Lateral to that fissure, you see this prominent long ridge known as the pyramid. It's just packed with those descending corticospinal axons. It's the white matter superhighway to the body.
Okay.
And if you move a little further laterally from the pyramid, there's this distinct oval-shaped prominence on each side, the olive.
That olive shape is a great landmark.
Yeah.
But it also sort of defines where some key cranial nerves pop out, doesn't it?
It does. The hypoglossal nerve, CN12, its rootlets emerge right in the groove between the pyramid and the olive. That's the preolivary sulcus.
And behind the olive.
If you move posterior to the olive, that's the retroolivary sulcus, and that gives exit to 3 really crucial nerves for swallowing and voice: the glossopharyngeal, IX, the vagus X, and the cranial rootlets of the accessory nerve.
Okay, so now let's mentally flip it around. Let's look at the dorsal surface. The medulla is partially open to the 4th ventricle there.
Correct. The central canal of the spinal cord opens up into the ventricle at a point called the ovex. And below that, in the closed part of the medulla, that's where the dorsal columns terminate.
That's the sensory info for fine touch and proprioception.
Exactly. And they form two little bumps, the gracile tubercle and the huneate tubercle.
And the lateral wall of the upper open medulla.
That's formed by the entrance ramps to the cerebellum, the inferior cerebellar peduncles, which are also called the restiform bodies.
Let's go inside now and look at the dramatic crossings that really define the medulla. First, that motor decussation.
Okay, so this is where those corticospinal fibers, the ones in the pyramid, cross the midline into the contralateral lateral funiculus of the spinal cord.
And there's a specific order to it.
There is, and it's often overlooked. There's a semitotopy, the fibers controlling your arms and neck. The cervical fibers, they cross first, so more rostrally. That leaves the fibers for the legs, the lumbosacral ones, to cross more caudally.
So a lesion there, you can predict exactly which part of the body is affected just based on the level.
Precisely.
That sets us up nicely for the sensory decussation, which happens a bit higher up.
Exactly. So after that sensory information synapses in the gracile and cuneate nuclei, secondary sensory fibers are generated. And they sweep dramatically across the midline as what we call internal arcuate fibers.
And once they cross,
They all coalesce into one large bundle, the medial lemniscus. And that ascends to carry all that tactile and proprioceptive info up to the thalamus.
so we've got motor crossing ventrally and caudally, and sensory crossing more centrally and rostrally. What about the olive we saw on the outside? What's happening inside the inferior olivary complex?
So inside that oval bulge is this fascinating complex nucleus. It's an irregularly crenated, or you could say crumpled, C-shaped mass of gray matter. And it has an opening, the hilum, that faces medially.
A crumpled C. And its job.
Think of it as a quality control checkpoint for your motor commands. It's a vital precerebellar nucleus, and its massive output, the alluvocerebellar fibers. They sweep across the entire medulla from that hilum. They aggregate into the main component of the contralateral restiform body and head straight to the cerebellum. It's a key piece of the motor learning feedback loop.
Okay, moving up, moving rostrally, we transition into section 2, the pons. Literally, the bridge sits right between the medulla and the midbrain. And visually, it's just defined by those incredible transverse fibers.
The pons, yeah, it's about 3 centimeters long, and its ventral surface is dominated by the basilar sulcus. And you're right, the whole surface is just packed with these transverse pontine fibers.
They give that bulging look.
They do. These fibers cross the midline to form the colossal middle cerebellar peduncles, or the brachium pontis, out laterally. That's what gives the pons its distinctive bulging appearance.
Where are our cranial nerves emerging here?
The trigeminal nerve, CN5, it emerges very conspicuously from the lateral most edge of the midpons. It's really thick. And then down at the pontomedullary junction, that groove between the two segments, that's where you find the abducens, facial 7, and vesiculocochlear nerves all clustered together.
And dorsally, on the floor of the fourth ventricle, we find a really classic anatomical landmark. It illustrates these spatial relationships just perfectly.
The facial colliculus, yes. This is a prominent bulge, and it's caused by the internal path of the facial nerve, number 7. Its motor fibers, they ascend toward the floor of the ventricle, and then they do this sharp hairpin turn, the genure, as a loop over the nucleus of the abducens nerve, number 6.
So it's basically hooking over another nerve's nucleus.
Exactly. It's an anatomical hook where one nerve uses the nucleus of another as a physical landmark, and it creates that little bump on the surface.
That's a great visualization cue.
Yeah.
Internally, the structure of the pons, it must reflect its function as this mass connection hub for the cortex. So tell us about the basal pons, the pontine engine.
The basal pons is just jammed with pontine nuclei. These nuclei are essentially intermediaries. They get descending corticopontine fibers, basically, motor intent, from the entire cerebral cortex.
All of it.
All of it. And in return, their efferents cross the midline as those massive transverse fibers we saw, forming the middle cerebellar peduncles, and they project to the contralateral cerebellum. It's the essential circuit that feeds the cerebellum motor commands from the cortex so the cerebellum can, regulate and smooth and coordinate movement.
We also get another major sensory crossing here. This one's for sound.
The auditory relay, right? Axons from the cochlear nuclei form the trapezoid body. It's a large, transversely oriented fiber bundle that crosses the midline in the ventral tegmentum.
And that crossing is for localizing sound.
It is. It ensures sound localization and bilateral processing. These fibers then turn sharply upward to ascend as the lateral lemniscus, carrying that auditory information up toward the midbrain.
Okay, now we're ready for section 3, the midbrain. This is the shortest and most rostral part, often described as the most complex anatomically.
It is dense. Its rostral border is defined by structures like the mammillary bodies, the optic tracts, and the posterior commissure. Ventrally, you just can't miss its defining feature. These two immense pillars of white matter.
The crus cerebra. Right.
Exactly. The cerebral peduncles, they carry all the crucial descending highways, corticospinal, corticonuclear, frontopontine tracts. And they flank this V-shaped interpeduncular fossa.
And critically.
Critically, the oculomotor nerve, CN3, its rootlets emerge right into this fossa.
And then dorsally, we finally get to see that unique third layer, the tectum.
The tectum, right. It features 4 rounded bumps, the corpora quadrigemina. The upper pair are the superior colliculi, which are key centers for visual reflexes for directing gaze. And the lower pair, the inferior colliculi, they are the principal terminal point for the lateral lemniscus.
Making them the central hub for ascending auditory information.
You got it.
And CN4 has that really distinctive, almost strange exit.
The trochlear nerve, yes. It's unique for 2 reasons. 1, it's the only cranial nerve to emerge from the dorsal surface of the brainstem. And 2, it's the only one that decussates. It crosses the midline entirely before it exits. It does that in the superior medullary velum.
Okay, going internal one last time. The midbrain tegmentum contains 2 major, deeply important gray matter complexes.
First, the red nucleus. It's ovoid, it's rostral, and it's involved in motor coordination through cerebellar connections. Second, and highly critical, is the substantia nigra, the SN, which sits just dorsal to the crus cerebri.
And we split that into 2 parts.
Functionally, yes. We divide it into the dorsal pars compacta, which contains those famous pigmented dopaminergic neurons, and the ventral pars reticulata, which is a GABAergic output nuclear.
So the substantia nigra pars compacta, that's the source of dopamine that fuels the whole basal ganglia circuit, meaning damage there is the root cause of Parkinson's disease. It's a metabolic engine for voluntary movement.
You nailed the function. If you can't fuel that circuit with dopamine from the pars compacta, the motor programs just fail. We also find the origins of the eye movers here. The oculomotor nucleus, 3, and the parasympathetic Edinger-Westphal nucleus.
And those nerve fibers take a pretty dramatic path out.
They do. Note how those CN3 fibers take this curving path, passing right through the red nucleus and the medial part of the substantia nigra before they finally emerge ventrally.
Which means that any swelling or mass effect in the midbrain is going to put pressure on those oculomotor nerve fibers really early in their path.
It does, which is a key clinical point we'll come back to. And finally, we have to mention the ultimate eye coordinator, the medial longitudinal fasciculus, or MLF.
The MLF,
Yeah.
such a small tract, but functionally it's massive.
Absolutely. It's a paramedian tract running through the dorsal tegmentum, and it's basically the communication wire connecting cranial nerves 3, 4, 6, and the vestibular nuclei.
Its whole job is coordinating eye and head movements.
Its sole job is to ensure conjugate eye and head movements. A lesion here causes internuclear ophthalmoplegia, where one eye can't adduct when the other is abducting. It is a hallmark sign of a disconnect in that coordination system. So now that we have the map, let's quickly connect these anatomical points to function by reviewing some vital brainstem reflexes.
Reflexes are perfect for this. They demonstrate a complete circuit in action. Let's look at the corneal or blink reflex.
This is a perfect example of the reticular formation's role in integration. The afferent limso, touching the cornea, travels via the trigeminal nerve, CN5. That information hits the sensory nuclei, activates interneurons in the reticular formation.
Which then excites the facial nerve nuclei.
Exactly, the motor nuclei for CN7, and it does it bilaterally. The result is that both eyes close at the same time.
And you can compare that polysynaptic loop to the jaw jerk reflex.
The jaw jerk is the exception. It's really the only significant supraspinal monosynaptic reflex. Proprioceptive efferents in the mandibular division of the trigeminal nerve. They bypass the interneurons completely. They synapse directly onto the trigeminal motor nucleus,
Causing that rapid jaw closure. It just shows how fast a direct sensory to motor connection can be.
Exactly.
All right, let's circle back to clinical localization. Bulbar palsy is a prime example of a medullary lesion that affects 3 key functions.
Yes, Bulbar palsy results from lesions affecting cranial nerve nuclei 9, 10, and 12 in the medulla. And since those nerves control the throat, palate, and tongue, the result is predictable. Severe dysarthria, that's speech difficulty, dysphagia, swallowing difficulty, dysphonia, voice changes, and hemitongue wasting. You can locate the damage just by watching the patient try to speak or swallow.
And the most life-threatening example we touched on earlier, uncal herniation.
This is a critical example of mechanical compression. When an expanding mass pushes the temporal lobe's uncus over the tentorial edge, the uncus typically presses on the midbrain and it crushes the ipsilateral oculomotor nerve, CN3.
And the pupils are the first sign?
The pupils are the first sign. Because the parasympathetic fibers for the pupil run on the outside of CN3, the very first sign is pupil dilation. The classic fixed and dilated pupil, followed quickly by ophthalmoplegia as the rest of the nerve function is lost. The map dictates the crisis.
Wow.
So we've completed our tour. The medulla, the center for vital regulation, those great decavations, the pons, that massive connection bridge for the cerebellum and auditory pathways, and the midbrain, home to the visual and auditory tectum, and the critical substantia nigra.
It is truly amazing how this compact core handles our fundamental existence, all while serving as the vital communication trunk between our highest cortical functions and the rest of the body.
And here's a thought to carry forward with you. Even though we rely on this classic gross anatomy, the boundaries of the brainstem are continuously being challenged by modern developmental science. We're seeing proposals to redefine these segments not just based on how they look, but on embryological development specifically, on neuromeres or rhombomeres.
So the classic boundaries that we just mapped out, they might eventually shift to reflect molecular biology.
Yeah.
I mean, possibly even moving the pyramidal decussation down into the C1 spinal segment in future definitions.
It could happen.
It just reinforces that foundational knowledge is always growing and the map of the human body is still being redrawn.
A powerful reminder that learning anatomy is a lifelong pursuit.
Indeed. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into the human brainstem. Use this anatomical knowledge wisely as you continue your studies.